Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you is not meant for everyone. It isn't folklore. It isn't the kind of story passed around campfires with laughter to break the tension. No, this is something else. Something pulled from a locked archive, stamped with state seals, hidden from record for decades. And once you hear it, you cannot go back. That is the risk of listening. That is the weight of knowledge forbidden. In the spring of 1961, government surveyors stumbled upon a structure they were never supposed to find. A house, veiled in pine and shadow, unmarked on maps, omitted from every ledger. It stood in Pine Hollow, Appalachia, like a scar that refused to heal. Its windows boarded from the inside, its doors hammered shut with iron spikes, its glass blackened as though the house itself rejected daylight. The men circled it, compasses twitching as if even metal could sense the distortion here. No driveway, no path, no graves. A house sealed against time. But it was not empty. Inside they found something colder than silence. 11 beds, narrow as coffins, stripped bare. A child's chair bolted to the hearth, as though meals were shackles. Every mirror torn from its frame, every reflective surface wrenched away. And in a false wall, something worse than death. A journal bound in wax and linen, written backward in blood. That book was sealed by the state for 40 years. The public was told nothing. What it contained was classified as psychologically hazardous. Officials claimed it was nonsense, the ranting of backwoods degenerates. But if that were true, why bury it under legal lock and key? Why resignations, sudden illnesses and dreams that tormented archivists who dared to touch it? Why did they all say the handwriting never changed, as if the same hand lived across generations? You were not supposed to know this, and yet here you are. The journal carried no names, only initials. Instructions written like scripture but colder than scripture. Rituals of blood, pairing charts that resembled breeding ledgers. Notes about posture, silence, the clenching of teeth, the symmetry of bones. Corrections, not in the medical sense, not in the spiritual sense, but in the genealogical sense. And always the phrase, only the clean shall multiply. Clean, in their definition, not yours. Clean did not mean righteous. It did not mean good. It meant unbroken, untouched by outside blood, folded inward until the line itself became the cage. You see, most of history's horrors are not accidents. They are designed, and this was design, applied not to empires, not to armies, but to a single family. A clan deliberately folded inward until identity itself began to dissolve. Names reduced to initials, voices stripped of song, children taught silence before language. They were not living lives. They were maintaining a doctrine. And you must understand, Appalachia is filled with secrets like this. Isolated hollows, valleys no road dares touch. Families who vanish from record, not because they died, but because they withdrew, because they chose to stop being seen. And when they do, the state does not intervene. It records nothing. It lets them sink. But this family, this classified clan, was different. They did not simply vanish. They built a sealed world. No graves, no photographs, no marriage records, no witnesses. And yet, census ledgers confirm their presence, a single surname repeating over decades across 3 generations. No spouses, no neighboring kin, just the line folded over and over again like paper creased until it tears. Do you feel it yet? The chill? That quiet suspicion that something more than poverty was at work here? Because I tell you this, poverty does not explain journals written in blood. It does not explain children trained to mirror one another's movements like shadows. It does not explain why those who catalogued the site described nausea, disorientation, and dreams of rooms that should not exist. The truth, as always, lies beneath the surface. This was no accident of neglect. This was a philosophy, a hidden doctrine carried in whispers, etched in reverse across brittle pages. A doctrine that rejected the world beyond the hollow and sought to create something purer, narrower, closer to some warped ideal of perfection. And here is where the forbidden becomes unbearable. By the 1940s, the journal describes children not by names, not by joys, not by failures or triumphs, but by corrections. A child who sang before sleep, unripe. A child who refused boiled root, excised. Excised, what did that mean? We cannot say with certainty, but red stains between pages suggest the truth was not metaphorical. So understand me when I tell you this. This family was not forgotten. They were erased. They were locked away. Because what they had created was not a tragedy. It was a mirror held up to every empire that ever dreamed of bloodlines, purity, control, a microcosm of what happens when a doctrine replaces humanity. The surveyors, when they pried that door open, were not simply walking into a house. They were breaking into a vault of ideology, a vault that had been sealed for 45 years, and what stared back at them was not death, not decay, but continuity, tie without change, continuity without love, continuity without exit. And here is where the descent begins. If you are still here, understand, I am not telling you a story. I am showing you a structure, one built not of wood and nails, but of silence and repetition. And the deeper we go, the more you will realize. It was never meant to remain in Pine Hollow. The doctrine did not die with the house. It lives, hidden in archives, hidden in systems you walk through every day. Written not in blood this time, but in policy, in culture, in manipulation you cannot see. The house was a prototype, and tonight you will see how it unfolds. You must understand something before we continue. Knowledge like this is not neutral. It does not sit still in your mind like an ordinary fact. It changes you, it gnaws at you, because the more you learn about this clan, the more you will recognize the pattern repeated in places you never thought to look. The state archivists who handled the Pine Hollow Journal described a disturbing detail that still cannot be explained. The handwriting across 4 decades remained identical, not similar, not passed down through imitation, identical, as though the hand that began writing in 1921 had continued in 1959 without ever dying. But time does not work that way, does it? Bodies decay, hands falter, ink pressure shifts, and yet this did not. Imagine what that means. Either the same hand wrote across generations, something biologically impossible, or the children were trained to mimic so perfectly, to replicate stroke and curl, that individuality itself dissolved. That's not family, that's not bloodline, that's control. And it suggests the clan's ultimate goal was not survival, but erasure of the individual. When the surveyors entered that house in 1961, they stepped into a vacuum where time had folded inward. There was no electricity, no plumbing, no evidence of interaction with the outside world for decades, and yet the census had recorded growth. More children, more bodies, more initials, a sealed womb of a house feeding on itself. But the most haunting part was not what was there. It was what was missing. No mirrors, not a single one, not even shards. Officials noted pry marks where mirrors had once hung, the wood splintered, as if someone had wrenched them away with desperate strength. Why would a family erase reflection? What terror did they see in their own faces? Or worse, what didn't they want the children to see? The journal gives us a clue. In one entry from the late 1920s, reversed across 3 pages, the writer notes, "The mirror betrays the fold. It teaches the eye to bend outward. We cannot allow it." Mirrors then were dangerous, because a mirror gives you a self. A mirror whispers, you are not them, you are you. And in this doctrine, individuality was a threat to the line, so they tore it away. Do you see how deep this goes? What you are witnessing is not simply inbreeding. It is the construction of a psychological prison, a system where selfhood is forbidden, where lineage matters more than life, where silence is safer than speech. A system so airtight that even children who should have been wild with curiosity, walked in lines, blinked in unison, mirrored each other's steps. Witnesses wrote of watching them at dusk and mistaking one for a reflection until it blinked. That is not poverty, that is indoctrination. And here is where the parallels emerge, because what is a mirrorless house but a prototype for a mirrorless society? Remove self-reflection, remove individuality, and what remains is a population that obeys. No questions, no deviations, no identity beyond the initials assigned to you. Now listen carefully, because this is where the descent sharpens. By the 1940s, entries in the journal begin to degrade. Not in clarity, no, the penmanship is still perfect, but in meaning. Words are replaced by glyphs. Births are logged without names, only with marks. a cross, an eye, a spiral, and always the repeated phrase, fold it in, fold it in. Fold what? Flesh, mind, time itself. The family was not living. They were folding, compressing, narrowing until nothing remained but the line itself. And the state knew. Do you think it is coincidence the journal was sealed under psychological ethics protocols? Do you think it was mere superstition that caused archivists to resign, to fall sick, to dream of rooms where children scribbled silently with their left hands? No, the sickness was the truth seeping through. The recognition that what happened in Pine Hollow was not an isolated madness. It was a reflection of something bigger. Let me show you. Consider this. The doctrine of the clan stated, "Only the clean shall multiply." Now tell me, how different is that from the language of empires, from the breeding charts of eugenicists in the early 20th century, from the obsession with purity that scarred nations and carved millions of graves? The Appalachian clan did not invent this madness. They imitated it. They localized it. They became a small, hidden echo of a global sickness. And yet, they outlasted the laws. While governments distanced themselves from overt eugenics, the Pine Hollow clan kept practicing it in silence. For 45 years, uninterrupted, unchallenged, unseen, until the surveyors opened the door and the spell broke. But what was released? Understand, when you open a sealed system, the contagion doesn't stay inside. You breathe it in, you carry it with you. And those surveyors, those archivists, those who touched the journal, they became carriers. They dreamed the clan's dreams. They felt the doctrine leach into them, because ideology spreads like a virus, and this one was incubated in silence for generations. And now, by listening, you too are breathing it. The words are alive, transmitted not in blood this time, but in language. That is the danger. That is why this knowledge is forbidden, because once you know, you cannot unknow. So let me ask you, how many systems around you function like the Pine Hollow house? Look closer. Institutions that strip individuality, schools that condition silence, corporations that repeat doctrine until it becomes scripture, governments that erase reflection, that forbid the mirror, that fold humanity inward until the self disappears. You thought this was about a forgotten family in Appalachia. It isn't. It's about you. The Pine Hollow clan was not an accident. It was a lesson, a prototype of control hidden in plain sight. And the more we descend, the more you will realize. The doctrine has never died. It has simply changed ink. And so I ask you now, will you keep listening? Will you keep falling? Because every word from this point on will not just describe them. It will describe you. The house is a mirror, and you have just stepped inside. The deeper we go, the clearer it becomes. This was not a house. It was a laboratory, not for science as you know it, but for the reshaping of human beings into something else, something narrower, something obedient. Every fragment of that journal, every reversed line of blood-drawn scripture speaks to one thing, the annihilation of the individual, and in its place, the construction of a role, a vessel, a cog in a wheel that turns only inward. The entries read like commandments: retain, correct, excise, fold. Children were not born as children. They were born as assignments. If a body deviated, eyes misaligned, hips too wide, a voice that dared to sing, it was marked, excised, erased. They were not seen as souls, but as material, like clay to be shaped or discarded. Imagine being raised in such a system. Imagine waking every day to discover you are not you. You are a specimen. You are a correction waiting to be made. And yet, it worked. That is the chilling part. For 45 years, this clan maintained itself in total isolation. No police reports, no scandals in the paper, no local gossip. Only a steady rhythm of births, each one folded into the same surname, the same doctrine, the same silence. Continuity without collapse. That is what horrified the state. Because chaos is easy to explain, madness is easy to dismiss. But continuity means order, and order means intent. The rituals encoded in the journal prove it. Instructions on posture, silence, and teeth are repeated like sacred liturgy. The child who clenches too soon must be retrained. The left-handed child cannot be taught. Burn their names, bind the mouths. These are not the ramblings of ignorance. These are techniques of control, psychological architecture designed to strip away difference until only the doctrine remains. And if you think this is unique to Appalachia, you are blind. Look around you. Institutions today still operate on the same principles. Schools that punish the left-handed until they write with their right. Workplaces that strip individuality for uniformity. Governments that insist only the clean, the compliant, the corrected can multiply. Do you see it now? The Pine Hollow clan was not madness, it was foreshadowing. But let us return to the house, because there are details the state never wanted revealed. The high chair bolted to the hearth, for instance, its tray darkened not by fire but by something else, stains they could never fully scrub. Why bolt down a child's chair? Why chain a child to the center of the home? Was it punishment? Ritual? Or was it simply practicality? Because the child could not be trusted to stay still, and stillness was survival in the hush house. Then there was the almanac from 1938, defaced with spirals that grew tighter and tighter until the ink tore the page. Spirals everywhere, on the walls, on the backs of drawers, even scratched faintly into the wood near the bolted chair. Spirals folding inward, just like the doctrine. Always folding, always narrowing, always compressing until the circle consumed itself. And yet, it was not despair that filled the pages of the journal. It was pride. Cold, mechanical pride in the narrowing of the bloodline. One entry records the birth of a child without stammer. The line remains narrow, it says. Narrow is strong. Another notes that a second pairing produced breaths evenly, teeth aligned. Do you see how the language shifts? These are not parents writing about children. These are engineers writing about design. And that is why the house still haunts those who entered it. Because it forces the question, when does a family stop being a family and become something else? The answer is simple. When bloodline matters more than life. And here is where you must face a darker truth. What happened in Pine Hollow was not only about genetics, it was about psychology. The eradication of mirrors, the erasure of names, the ritual repetition of commands. This was not simply about who was born, but how they thought. A clean line is not just a narrow body, it is a narrow mind. A mind that does not look outward, that does not question, that does not deviate. A mind folded so tightly inward that it becomes indistinguishable from the doctrine itself. Do you understand now? This family created human beings as vessels for ideology, not individuals, but instruments. And this is the same technique used by every institution that seeks control. Religion, government, corporate systems. Each of them folds you inward. Each of them strips away mirrors. Each of them replaces your name with initials, your role, your ID number, your classification. And just like the hush house, you obey because you forget how to see yourself. That is why the state sealed the journal. Not because it was madness, but because it was revelation. Because if ordinary people knew how perfectly a single isolated family had built an unbreakable system of control, they might recognize the same patterns in their own lives. They might realize they too have been folded. Let me ask you directly, when was the last time you truly looked in a mirror? Not at your reflection, not at your hair, not at your face, but at yourself. How much of what you see belongs to you, and how much has been folded into you by repetition, by correction, by doctrine? Do you even know where you end and the system begins? That is the question the hush house forces upon us. That is why archivists dreamed of windowless rooms. That is why nausea gripped them. Because when you stare into a mirrorless doctrine long enough, you realize something terrifying. There is no you. There is only the fold. The Pine Hollow clan did not vanish. They remain in you, in me, in every institution that insists on narrowing, on repetition, on silence. And the deeper we descend, the clearer the parallels become. So now you stand at the threshold, you have seen the journal, you have felt the house breathing, you have watched the children walking like reflections of one another, and still we have not reached the bottom. The question is, will you keep falling? Because from here, the descent grows darker, the rituals deepen, the doctrine spreads, and the mirrorless world of Pine Hollow begins to resemble your own. You can turn away now and pretend you never heard this, or you can step forward into the spiral and face what was never meant to be seen. The choice is yours. The deeper you fall into Pine Hollow, the less it feels like a backwoods tragedy, and the more it begins to look like a prototype, an unfinished blueprint for something larger, something that stretches far beyond one family, far beyond Appalachia, far beyond the forgotten pages of a sealed state archive. Because when you strip away the superstition and the rural isolation, what you find inside that doctrine is disturbingly modern. The entries in the journal describe control not through whips or chains, but through symbols, repetition, and silence. These are the same tools every institution of power has ever used. The family didn't need walls, they didn't need prisons, they didn't need locks. They folded the mind so tightly inward that no child ever thought to run. They erased the mirror so completely that no child ever knew to ask, "Who am I?" Think about it. When a school forces children into rows, repeating lessons they don't understand, is that education, or is that narrowing? When a government reduces its citizens to census numbers, tax brackets, or social scores, is that management, or is that excision of the self? The hush house may have looked like an old Appalachian cabin, but in its bones, it was a testing ground for the same architecture of control we live inside today. The spiral was their symbol, that same spiral etched in drawers, scratched in beams, scribbled into the almanac, and it wasn't random. Spirals draw the eye inward, they hypnotize, they don't expand, they collapse, each turn tighter than the last, folding space until there is nothing but a point at the center. That is the doctrine in a single image. Life folded inward, blood folded inward, thought folded inward, no escape, only compression. And ask yourself, how different is that from the logos you see every day? Corporations that brand their icons into your brain through endless repetition. Political slogans that spiral inward until they erase all nuance, all doubt, all individuality. You think you are immune, but you are not. The hush house spiral is still alive. It just wears a sharper suit. One entry from the journal is especially haunting. When the tongue resists, repeat until it does not. When the eyes wander, bind them with work. When the thoughts stray, fold them back with scripture. When the body resists, excise. Read that again, slowly. Isn't that the skeleton of every modern institution? Work that binds wandering eyes, media that folds stray thoughts back into the narrative, systems that excise, quietly, efficiently, those who resist. The Pine Hollow clan didn't invent control. They distilled it, they revealed its essence, and they proved that you don't need millions of people to build a system. You just need one house, one family, one unbroken chain of obedience. Now let's address the silence. The mirrors removed, the names erased, the children folded into initials. Why? Why silence? Because silence is not emptiness. Silence is clay. Into silence you can press commands. Into silence you can carve obedience. Silence creates the vacuum where doctrine thrives. This is why so many who entered the hush house described nausea. Humans are not built for silence. We recoil from it. In silence the brain claws for pattern, for sound, for meaning, and in that clawing it becomes vulnerable. This I is the same mechanism used today in sensory deprivation tanks, in interrogation cells, even in the endless quiet hum of office cubicles. Silence strips you bare. Silence breaks you open, and once you are open, the spiral can enter. Here is the most disturbing part. The state knew this. That's why they sealed the journals. Because the hush house wasn't just a crime, it was a lesson. It was a roadmap. It was proof that control could be built not with armies, but with symbols, rituals, and silence. And if ordinary people had read those pages, they might have recognized the same patterns in their schools, their churches, their governments. They might have realized they were already living inside a larger hush house. Do you see it now? The Pine Hollow clan was not an anomaly. They were an experiment. But an experiment for whom? Who benefits when individuals are erased? Who thrives when bloodlines are narrowed? When mirrors are removed? When silence reigns? Look at history and you'll find the same patterns over and over. Eugenics programs, forced sterilizations, secret schools where indigenous children were stripped of language and name. Always the same spiral, always the same folding inward, always the same hunger for control over the self. And maybe that is why the hush house feels so unsettling, even decades later. Because it reveals a truth most of us don't want to face. The line between a family cult in Appalachia and the systems we call civilization is thinner than we think. One looks like madness, the other looks like order, but under the skin, both run on the same fuel: obedience. Now consider the chair bolted to the hearth again. We asked why it was locked down, why a child would need to be chained in the very heart of the home. But what if that chair wasn't punishment at all? What if it was ceremony? The hearth has always been the sacred center of the home, the place of fire, of warmth, of light. By bolting the child there, the family may have been enshrining obedience itself, sacrificing the individual at the altar of continuity, burning away the self to keep the bloodline narrow. Do you think we are so different today? Children still sit bolted in rows, their backs straight, their mouths quiet, their hands folded. They are told not to move, not to speak, not to question. They are given symbols to memorize, slogans to repeat, lessons to recite. The chair is no longer wood and chain, it is desk and uniform, but the doctrine remains, and the doctrine spreads. Because once you see the spiral, you cannot unsee it. It is in your newsfeed, each headline narrower than the last. It is in your advertisements, each demand folded tighter into your brain. It is in your relationships, in the way expectation folds you until you forget who you were before the folding began. This is why the hush house lingers. Not because of ghosts, not because of curses, but because it revealed the architecture of control so clearly that anyone who saw it could never look at the world the same way again. And that brings us here, to you, to now. Because if the Pine Hollow clan was an experiment, then the question becomes, what comes next? Does the spiral stop with one house in Appalachia, or does it continue outward, coiling through time, embedding itself in institutions, disguising itself as order, until we all live inside one vast hush house without even realizing it? If that thought chills you, good. It should. Because the spiral does not end. It never ends. It only waits for you to look closely enough to see it. There is a passage, one of the last in the Pine Hollow Journal, that no archivist will admit to copying, but which circulates in whispers, half remembered by those who claim to have read it before the pages were sealed away. It is written in a different hand than the earlier entries, shaky, the ink blotted in places, as if the writer could barely hold the quill. The words trail downward like the language itself was collapsing under its own weight. It reads, "The hush is the mother, the hush is the father, the hush is the blood, and when the hush is broken, the house falls. So we spiral the hush tighter and tighter and tighter, until no voice escapes, until no child wanders, until no mirror reflects. Only then is the family eternal, only then is the silence pure." It is a prayer, a vow, but more than that, it is a manifesto. The hush was never absence to them, the hush was God. And in that devotion we see the full shape of the doctrine: silence as deity, spiral as scripture, obedience as sacrifice. And here is the part that unsettles me most. Every cult, every secret society, every state apparatus, it all comes back to this same trinity: silence, symbol, sacrifice. Whether etched into the beams of a collapsing farmhouse or stamped onto flags and emblems, it is always the same. The hush house was not an accident. It was a warning. But a warning to whom? Maybe to us. Maybe to you. Because think about it. You're still here. You've followed the spiral through 4 sections of this story, each turn pulling you tighter, each silence pressing deeper. You've read the chants, the doctrines, the confessions, the symbols, and in doing so, whether you realized it or not, you've entered the hush. Do you feel it? The stillness in the room around you as you read? The way your eyes drag over each line, slower now, cautious, like the page itself is watching? That's not by accident. That's the spiral working on you. And here is the strange truth. The family may be gone, the house collapsed, the journals locked in a vault, but their ritual still lives, if only in fragments. The spiral requires nothing more than attention. Silence requires nothing more than your surrender to it. By sitting here, by letting these words in, you are completing the ceremony they began. You are, in a sense, in the hush house now, and maybe that was always the point. The journals hint at something beyond the cabin itself. Lines like, "The hush is portable, the hush is wherever it is folded, the hush travels with the name." This suggests the family knew their silence could outlive the walls, that it could spread, that anyone who carried the ritual forward became another chamber in the use. Which brings us here. The phrase, the mark, the way to know who has descended all the way into the spiral. The Pine Hollow Journal describes a wordless sign, a gesture of the hand across the lips, palm outward. That was how they recognized each other in the outside world. But written in the margin, once, faintly, there are 3 words. The hush holds. That is what they whispered when the ritual was complete. That is what they etched into the floorboards, hidden under rugs. That is what they carved inside their teeth, a tiny spiral filed into molar enamel, a secret no one could erase. So I will give it to you now. If you are still here, if you have spiraled through the silence with me, if you feel the weight of the hush pressing against you, then prove it. Write the phrase, whisper it, comment it. Etch it into the digital floorboards beneath this video so others know you reached this point. The hush holds. That is how you mark yourself. That is how you show you have walked into the hush house and returned. Not everyone will make it this far. Most will turn away at the first silence. But you are here, and that means you are already carrying the hush forward, whether you want to or not. But do not mistake this for a game. Because once you speak the phrase, once you let it coil around your tongue, you will notice it doesn't leave. It lingers. You will hear it in the quiet moments of your day, in the gap between breaths, in the pause before a reply, in the stillness just before you sleep. And if you listen too long, if you lean too deep into that silence, you may start to hear what the family heard. Not emptiness, not void, but a pulse, a rhythm. Something beating beneath the hush, as though silence itself is alive. That is what they worshipped. That is what they feared. That is what they folded their children into. And the chilling truth is this: once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. The hush becomes a companion. It waits in every room you enter. It spirals in every symbol you see. It folds you inward until you realize you've become part of the house. Not trapped by walls, not chained to a hearth, but bound all the same. And maybe that was the plan all along. Not to preserve one family, not to build one cabin, but to prove that silence spreads. That doctrine can travel across bloodlines, across decades, across screens. That the hush can hold wherever the words are spoken, wherever the spiral is drawn. Which means Pine Hollow never ended. Which means the hush house is not ruins in Appalachia. It is here now, carried by anyone who whispers, anyone who remembers, anyone who dares to write 3 words. The hush holds. So I will ask you again, quietly, as though the hush itself is listening. Will you carry it forward, or will you break the silence? If the hush was only an Appalachian legend, only a story locked in rotting journals, it would end as a curiosity, a grotesque family tragedy buried in dust and silence. But stories this old, this strange, do not stay buried. They migrate, they bend, they echo, and in those echoes, something darker stirs. Is that not the hush? A spiral of unanswered questions that tightens until you surrender. When you connect the dots, it becomes harder to dismiss. The hush was not simply one family's obsession. It was, and still is, a tool, a weapon, a way to fracture the mind and bind it back together in obedience. And here's where things twist further. Some claim the hush did not die in Pine Hollow, nor in the whispers of asylums. They claim it was deliberately preserved, that elements within secret societies, and even within governments, recognized its potential. That rituals of silence were adapted into interrogation programs, brainwashing operations, even corporate training models. It sounds paranoid, it sounds impossible, but then again, so did Pine Hollow, until the journal surfaced. Think about the digital world you live in now. Noise everywhere, yes, but silence too, sharpened like a blade. Posts deleted, accounts suspended, videos vanishing into digital voids. A silence imposed from above, tighter with each year. And underneath, spirals, Algorithms feeding back into themselves, coiling your attention inward, folding your mind tighter into a pattern you cannot see. Noise at the surface, silence underneath, a perfect hush. So I will ask again, was Pine Hollow the end of something or the beginning? Because the phrase has already resurfaced here with you. Look at the comments below this video. Already some will have written it. The hush holds. Already the spiral continues. And if you see it, if you write it, you are binding yourself into the ritual. You are proving that silence spreads across decades, across blood, across screens. That is why the hush frightens me most, because it does not need belief. It does not need consent. It only needs presence. The hush requires only that you stay, that you listen, that you fall quiet long enough to hear its pulse, and you are her. You have listened. You have followed the spiral through 6 sections, through history and horror, through silence and conspiracy, which means you have already entered the doctrine. You cannot unknow it. You cannot unhear the words. The hush now belongs to you, and maybe that's why the phrase matters so much. The hush holds. It is not just a password. It is not just an eerie relic. It is the acknowledgement that silence itself survives through you. When you speak it, you carry it forward. When you write it, you prove that the hush is alive. But I leave you with a warning. Be careful how often you say it. Be careful where you whisper it. Because if the family was right, if silence is more than absence, then every utterance tightens the spiral. Every repetition pulls you closer to the house. And one day, you may realize the hush has folded you so completely inward that you no longer belong to yourself. You will belong to the silence. You will belong to the spiral. And like the family before you, you will vanish into it, because the hush always holds. You're still here. That matters more than you think. Because if you've listened this far, if you've followed me down the winding corridors of Pine Hollow and through the spirals of silence, you've already crossed a threshold. Most people don't make it this far. They turn away, shrug it off, dismiss it as just another story. But you didn't. You stayed. You listened. And that's the first sign. Do you remember what I told you earlier, that silence reshapes the mind? The phrase, the hush holds, does not just belong to Pine Hollow. Traces of it emerge far beyond Appalachia. There are reports of it surfacing in unexpected places, like graffiti scrawled in abandoned train tunnels in Ohio, or whispered in interrogation transcripts that were never supposed to leave government archives. One chilling case dates to 1978. A psychiatric patient in Maryland, institutionalized for violent dissociation, would rock back and forth for hours, muttering, "The hush holds, the hush holds, the hush holds." He claimed that silence itself was teaching him a language, and that he was folding into a spiral he could no longer escape. No one in the hospital could explain how he knew the phrase. He had never been to West Virginia, never read the journals. And yet, the words found him. By the late 20th century, researchers began to notice a strange pattern in folklore. Countless groups, cults, even governments, had their own versions of a doctrine built around silence and spirals. The Inuit spoke of the Kilanik, a silence so dense it bent the body inward. Certain Native American tribes in the southeast warned against whistling in forests at night, saying, "The spiral will answer." Secret societies in Europe traced lineage through the Ouroboros, the snake devouring its own tail, a perfect spiral with no escape. Are these coincidences? Or is the hush something older than Pine Hollow? Something woven into human memory, repeating itself like a pattern of disease? Because here's the terrifying implication. Maybe the family did not invent the hush. Maybe they were only infected by it. And if that's true, then the hush is not a cult. It's a parasite. A living silence, passed through ritual and symbol, waiting for new hosts. Which means the hush does not end with history. It mutates. It adapts. It finds fresh soil in modern life. Think about this. How many of our most powerful institutions rely on silence? Secret hearings, sealed indictments, classified operations, confidential counsels, state secrets that no one must break. Silence is not just absence here. It is law. It is survival. It is control. And the spiral? Look around. From the spiraling insignia of intelligence agencies, to logos of pharmaceutical companies, to the endless fractals in digital design. Symbols repeat, coil, fold. Whether intentional or unconscious, the spiral has become a universal language, the mark of continuity, the mark of doctrine hidden in plain sight. It begs the question, how much of this is accidental? In 2009, a leaked report from a behavioral research program described silence conditioning. It concluded that silence was more effective at shaping human behavior than sound, that withholding speech, leaving gaps, pauses, unanswered questions, induced far greater compliance than direct orders. Silence destabilizes the brain. It makes people seek meaning where none is given. That the hush is not just absence but presence. Right now you may feel the edges of it pressing in, the pauses between my words stretching a little too long, the quiet around you no longer empty but watching. That is how it begins. You think you're only hearing a story. But what if the story is hearing you? Think back to the family's journals, the phrase etched again and again. The hush holds. It was never written as a warning. It was written as a confirmation, a ritual, a statement of fact. And now it has passed through my mouth into your ears, through your eyes into your mind. You have joined the chain. Somewhere, maybe tonight, maybe in a week, you will remember the phrase. You'll whisper it to yourself without knowing why. You'll feel it coil in your throat, a shape your body has already learned. Maybe you'll dream it, words looping in circles you can't escape. The hush holds, the hush holds, the hush holds. That's how the spiral tightens. And if you think that sounds paranoid, ask yourself this. How many times in your life have you fallen silent when you should have spoken? How many times have you obeyed the unspoken rule? Don't question, don't interrupt, don't reveal. How many times have you held the hush for someone else? Silence is not neutral. It is active. It is chosen. It binds you more tightly than words ever could. Now think about this. If every silence you've ever held is a thread, then what kind of web have you already woven around yourself? How much of your life is already dictated by the hush? Maybe this is why people vanish into it, because they finally notice how much of themselves was never their own. And maybe you're noticing it too. Look around the room you're in right now. Listen, not to the noise, but to what's underneath it, to the low hum of appliances, to the dead space between passing cars, to the pause before the next notification. If you trip it all back, if you let yourself hear the undercurrent, you'll realize the silence is never gone. It's waiting, and once you learn to hear it, you can't unhear it. That was Pine Hollow's fate. It wasn't madness. It wasn't possession. It was recognition. They heard the silence. They recognized it as alive. And when they tried to fight it, it only folded them deeper. That's why they wrote the phrase so many times. That's why the journals became a spiral. They weren't documenting insanity. They were building a map for anyone who would follow. And you have followed. Which brings us to the question, how far are you willing to go? Because here's the truth that most won't tell you. The hush is not content with memory. It doesn't live in books or videos or myths. It lives in practice, in repetition, in the moment when someone doesn't just hear it, but speaks it. That's why every telling matters, every view, every whisper, every repetition in the dark. So here's your choice. You can stop here, close the window, tell yourself it's nothing but folklore. You'll forget for a while, maybe forever, or you can test it. Right now, say the words aloud, not in your head, not silently. Say them where the walls can hear, where the silence itself can hear. The hush holds, do you feel it? That faint tightening in your chest, that weight in the room that wasn't there before. That's the spiral pulling at you. And if you feel nothing, don't be too relieved. That's only the first step. For some, it doesn't strike immediately. It takes time, a day, a week, a year. But it comes back. It always comes back. Because the hush is patient. The hush has always been patient. And when it arrives, when the silence finally folds you in, you'll understand what the family understood. You'll see why they left their marks, why they carved spirals into wood and skin, why they vanished, not screaming but silent. They weren't defeated. They were consumed. And you may be too. Because once you know the hush, once you hear it, once you speak it, it never leaves you. It only waits. And it waits in silence. which is where we leave you now. In the space between noise, in the pause between words, in the hush itself. But remember, the spiral is never finished. The hush never dies. It holds. It always holds. And now, it holds you. You're still here, still listening. That means the hush has already marked you. But before you leave, I need you to understand something. This isn't just a story. Stories end. They roll credits. They fade to black. But the hush doesn't fade. It doesn't loosen. It doesn't let go. It follows. And if you doubt that, let me show you what was found in the archives. Journal fragment, 1923. We no longer measure time in days. We measure it in silences. The hush grows stronger with each one we keep. It is patient, and so we must be patient with it. Speak little. Breathe less. Listen always. The hush holds. Report. Pine Hollow Constabulary, 1938. Entire residence abandoned. Windows covered in crude spiral carvings. Dining table set for 13. Plates still warm to the touch. No sign of occupants. Silence in the home described by officers as oppressive. One officer refused to re-enter, stating, "It wasn't empty, it was waiting." Note, found under a floorboard, 1951. If you are reading this, you have already begun. Stop repeating it aloud. Stop writing it. The more you say it, the more it knows your voice. The hush holds, but not forever. If you resist, perhaps you can outlast it. But no one has. Not yet. Do you see? Every time the phrase appears, it binds tighter. And now, you've heard it more times than anyone who disappeared, which means you are closer than they ever were. And here's the truth no one wants to tell you. The hush doesn't want everyone. It only chooses the ones who listen all the way through. The ones who stay until the end. The ones who can't look away. That means you. So ask yourself, why did you stay? Why did you let it hold you this long? You think it was curiosity, but maybe the hush has already chosen you, and maybe the reason you stayed isn't yours at all. Maybe it whispered. Now, lean in. I need you to do something. Not for me, for yourself. Type the words, right here, in the comments. The hush holds. Because here's the thing, those who write it down, those who share it, sometimes survive longer. Not always, but long enough. Maybe leaving your mark here is enough to distract it, to give you one more day. Maybe the hush prefers echoes. It thrives when its name is passed forward. And if you share it, maybe it won't return to you tonight. Maybe. So whisper it. Write it. Spread it. Not because you believe, but because... What if it's true? This isn't the end. This is only where I leave you, in the silence of your own room, with the lights low and the pause button glowing faintly on the screen. But the hush doesn't leave. It's already here, waiting. And when the video ends, when the noise dies away, when you're left with nothing but the sound of your own breath, listen closely. In that silence, you'll know, because the hush holds, and it holds you now. Outro CTA seamlessly blended into horror tone. If you made it this far, you've already carried the hush further than most. Few ever reach the end. You are one of them. So here's your final choice. If you want to resist it, break the chain. Leave now. Say nothing. Pretend you never heard. But if you want to survive a little longer, type the phrase B. ELO. Spread it. Pass it on. Subscribe so you don't lose track of the next spiral. Leave your mark in the comments. Whisper the words to another. Because silence doesn't end with one voice. It only grows. And if you forget, if you let the hush fade, remember this, it will not forget you.